It's lovely to welcome back Father Federico. He's been here a few days, in fact, but he was supplying last Sunday. So you're very, very welcome, Father Federico. Thanks for being with us this summer. Many of you met him last summer. He's here to do some studies and to soak in England and just to enjoy being with us. And I'm very grateful, especially with me coming and going over the next few weeks. And look, I'm deeply sorry that I didn't ask Father Federico to preach today, because his whole studies at the moment are about Genesis, which we've heard, and the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. And in fact, he won't be telling you this himself, but I'm going to tell you anyway, he's doing a new translation of the first 5 books of the Old Testament as the official Italian translation, the new one, for the Italian Bishops' Conference. A translation and notes. So I'm sorry he's not preaching for 2 reasons. One is you won't get the benefit of his wisdom, and secondly that I have to preach with him sitting behind me here. But I'll do the best I can. This week, lots of you know, we've been doing lots of filming for Sycamore. We're nearly finished season 2. And I spent the whole of Friday in our local church, St Charles Borromeo in Ogle Street. We went there because I was teaching about baptism, and as many of you know, there is this incredible full immersion baptismal pool in the floor in Ogle Street. So there it is. We uncovered the gold covers, the mosaics, and the stairs were exposed, and we had this fantastic, I think they call it a gimbal or something, this kind of Steadicam that was doing a 360 degrees photography of the font. So you can see that in just a few months' time, I hope. But going in the lobby at Ogle Street, I hadn't noticed before, maybe it's new, there is a painting, a new painting, not a reproduction, an original painting based on the famous Rublev's Trinity. Rublev's Trinity, by the Russian artist Rublev, but properly titled The Hospitality of Abraham. Rublev's Trinity, the Hospitality of Abraham. And this is the best known illustration of the first reading that we had today from Genesis, chapter 18. Abraham sitting in his tent, the Lord appears to him in the mysterious form of 3 visitors. He welcomes them and offers them hospitality. They make a special promise, a prophecy to him and his wife Sarah. So that's the summary. We've heard that already. What's happening here? What's it all about? Well, don't miss the most obvious thing here. It's about hospitality. The hospitality of Abraham. The simple, fundamental importance of hospitality at every level. Human, personal, social, cultural, biblical. The call to welcome others, especially the stranger. The obligation that we have to others to welcome them. The debt we owe God and other people. And for the Jewish people, the memory that the layers of the Old Testament muddled and intertwined with each other, the memory here of how they have been strangers and exiles at different times in their history, and they've been welcomed by different peoples, and the debt they owe to God and to others. So hospitality is not just supererogation, being kind, going out of our way to do things that others don't deserve. The hospitality we give to others is a debt that we owe to God and to history and to society. And this is not just about simple politeness, having a cup of tea with someone, as we might say in England. This is about life or death. In the Old Testament, in that harsh Near Eastern environment, you might be giving refuge to someone from their enemies. You are giving shelter from the murderous heat. You're giving food and drink to those who are starving in the desert. It's very clear. Notice these visitors arrive in the heat of the day. It's not an accident. It's a time when you die if you are not in the shade of a tree or the tent. So hospitality is a serious business. For us to remember it as an imperative. It affects us, I hope, in our ordinary kindness and the everyday welcome that we give to people. Basically, how hospitable is your heart? And then building on that, if we grow in this everyday ordinary virtue of being open and kind and welcoming to people, the way that affects our relationships, the person we are, the way it affects the kind of home that we build. Well, you're in student digs, most of you, the home that you're beginning to build or that you will build, so that your home is not a fortress, finally I've got my own place, but a place of welcome with an open door. This virtue, this attitude, it affects the way that we are open to the gift of new life and children in our marriages. Being open to God's plans, His gifts, often His surprising gifts, and not just our own stubborn and sometimes narrow plans. It means going the extra mile for others. It affects everything. It affects family, relationships, workplace. How hospitable are we in our hearts and in our lives? Second, though, this is not just about hospitality in general. This is about someone welcoming God. God. Abraham is aware that these are no ordinary visitors. We know, as readers, listeners, from line 1, verse 1, this is the Lord, the Lord. And Abraham knows. See the way that he's so honoured to have these guests, the extra welcome that he gives them. He's not just being kind, he doesn't want to lose them. He knows there is a blessing for him and his family if he can welcome God. This is true. Now, this is not the prosperity gospel with all its ambiguities, but it's true that we are blessed if we welcome God into our lives. Abraham here is a model of openness to God. When he realised it was the Lord, notice his attention, his care, his busyness, his fussing, we would say, going out of his way. That spontaneous energy, it makes me think of Peter in the boat after the resurrection, with Jesus on the shore, and John says, "Hey, it's the Lord." And as soon as Peter realises this, he dives into the water and swims to Jesus. He gives everything and holds nothing back. And of course, with the gospel today, it makes us think of Mary and Martha. Both together, I would say. Mary's attention and prayerfulness and love for the Lord, and Martha's care and hard work and service. All of this we see in Abraham's attitude. So that's to think about. Do you welcome the Lord with such care and attention? Think of the energy, the fussing, the attention you give to your studies and your relationships and your work. Is it the same for your God and your faith? That's what this reading partly is about. But of course, we're finally there. Rublev's Trinity. This is a reading for us as Christians about the Most Holy Trinity. We see this very naturally. We hear that the Lord is coming to visit, singular. The one God, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Jewish people, the Lord. But he's coming in the form of 3 mysterious visitors. And the Hebrew text is so strange and mysterious, as Father Federico can tell you after Mass. It's jumping about between 1 and 3, between I and we. Abraham is jumping about in his vocative between the singular and the plural. We can't do that in English. Yeah? You and you. You singular, you plural. Tu in the French and vous in the plural. It's all over the place. It's completely wrong and messed up grammatically and narratively, unless you can see that the one God is here in the form of three mysterious divine persons, as we see with our Christian and New Testament faith. It's been wonderful to read a Jewish commentary on the Bible that I've been reading these last few weeks, and to read the commentator trying to make sense of this reading. He's saying, maybe this is a fusion of two traditions. Maybe there's three persons here, and one of them is the divine God, and there are two accompanying angels. And there's all sorts of attempts to make sense of it. Wonderful, beautiful attempts to make narrative and theological sense. But for the Christian, in the light of the teaching of Jesus and the Church and our knowledge of the Trinity, it's crystal clear. This is a prefigurement of the Trinity. One God in three persons. And you see this in Rublev's famous painting. And if you don't just want to click online, go to Ogle Street and look at this wonderful interpretation tomorrow. In that painting, there are three distinct persons, but they have the same face, the same portrait. You see how their gestures sitting round the table are distinct, but they unite them, pointing to each other and to the gifts on the table. There's a sense of visual unity, thematic unity. They're united with each other and round the altar. It's an image of the Trinity, one God, three persons, and it helps us to make sense of this scripture reading, and also, little sub-point here, the unity of the Old and the New Testament, the unity of the two covenants. God speaks to us one word. He doesn't say half a word, take it back, and they then say something different in the New Testament. He speaks one word, and that word is fulfilled and is given its clarity in Jesus and in the New. And a final thought here. It's kind of cut off at the end, but it's there. We should have had another 2 verses, really, to get the proper story. This is a story, a passage, also about a promise and a prophecy. Having welcomed God, what would have happened if they hadn't welcomed him? That's the question. Having welcomed God, they give him the space to speak. And Abraham and Sarah, listening in the background, have the space to hear God's incredible promise that Abraham and Sarah, in their old age, will have a child. This is impossible. They are old and beyond childbearing. But we know that nothing is impossible to God. We have this echoed in Elizabeth's pregnancy in the New Testament. Sarah hears the prophecy. She's listening secretly. She's eavesdropping. And she doesn't believe. Who would? She is incredulous. And she laughs. Now, don't misinterpret this. This is not a happy laugh. This is not a skipping around laugh. In the Old Testament, a laugh, and especially in this instance, it is a scornful laugh. It's a strong word I'm using, but it's true. Sarah's laugh is scornful. It's dismissive. It's an insult to her guest. That's why when she realises that the guests have overheard and they criticise Abraham, she's terrified. Oh, I was caught scorning my guest and his promises and their promises. We might not hear the promises that God makes us because we're not listening like Mary in the New Testament reading, because we don't welcome the Lord like Abraham did. And if we do hear the promises that God makes to us, we might not believe. But we're called to hear and to believe. This is what Jesus said to Thomas after the resurrection. Blessed are those who have not seen the promises fulfilled, but who believe. Blessed are those, we could say, who hear and believe. It's true for us all. It's true in the great promises of salvation that God has given to all of us and to each of us individually. And it's true in the little promises that God makes personally and individually to each one of us. His promise to you for happiness, for healing, for help, for a fulfilment of your little dreams and hopes and prayers. And God says, yes. Yes. Trust me and believe. He's a God of miracles, a God of the impossible. And we should never ever give up on him or stop believing.